Hello and welcome back to Crazy Dove Studio. In this video, we will look at the basic of REST API for NetWorker. So in short, REST is a framework and API or application programming interface is one of the methods to interact with a software application and is usually a HTTP based connection. NetWorker REST API provides a mechanism to access the functions provided by NetWorker software. The API interface helps you to build client application and automate networker operations by using any programming language that supports JSON over HTTP. In short, this is how the HTML5 networker UI interacts with networker, and we can leverage this API as well. You can use the NetWorker REST API to perform a number of functions which are displayed on your screen. You can pause the video here and go through all these functions because I'm not going to read out each one of them for this video. So let's go ahead and talk about authentication first, because unless you're authorized to access the contents of NetWorker server, you won't get any useful information out of the NetWorker API server. So you can supply the username and password by plain text as shown here. The credentials that you need to use for the API call is the same one that you usually use to log in into your NMC or into your NetWorker HTML UI. So you can usually use the one you use for daily operations, or you could create a new user to be used for the REST API related tasks. So this is the URL or curl command that can be used. So this is usually when you're using this on a Linux terminal. You could use a curl command because curl helps you connect to any endpoint which is HTTP or HTTPS based. And here if you see that we are passing the username and password as plain text to the endpoint for authentication. In case you are planning on using this format, it is best to surround the password with a single quote, because there might be some characters in your password that can interfere with the overall format. So it is always good to have or use single quotes around the password string. You can also use an encoded credentials. So you can use the basic scheme that is supported by HTTP. It is a simple authentication scheme built into the HTTP protocol. So the client sends the HTTP request with the authorization header that contains the word basic and is followed by a base64 encoded string. So this string is nothing but the combined user and password, that is basically this entire string here, going back, this entire string here, which is encoded in a base64. Here you see an example of such a request, and this is something that we will be using in most of our examples. So again, keep in mind that this is only encoded, it is not encrypted, meaning that if you use this string and or publish it anywhere in your environment, then this is not safe, because if somebody knows that this is 64 or this is base 64 encoded, it is easy for them to decode it back to the original string. So only when you're storing it or saving it in a repo, this is usually a problem, because this is saved as pure text. But you don't have to worry about the actual connection, because either way the REST API is using the HTTPS, which is a secure version of HTTP, and unlike HTTP, the HTTPS protocol encrypts the payload before transmitting it over to the API server, meaning that if somebody tries to sniff the packet in between and tries to read the contents of the transmission, they will not be able to read it, but because it would be encrypted payload. My recommendation is to use an authentication method in your application if you are using it, to create a tool so that the username and password are passed to it during runtime and not stored anywhere, which can be easily accessed. Now let's take a look at how to query the REST API for any information that we need from NetWorker. The format to be used is right up here in the heading. So you have the complete URL, which is basically HTTPS, the protocol, the IP address or host name of your backup server, the port that the API service would be running or listening on the networker server is 9090, which is the Auth service port. Then we have the API itself. All the way up to here is a constant string. The last part of the URL here is called an endpoint, and the header here, so the endpoint mentioned here is basically clients in the example general query that you have here. Next, you have the query parameter, the URL parameters that is usually passed with HTML URLs, which is your query parameter, and you pass the attributes that you want to set the particular query for. So in the first example, that is named general query, we have a call to the networker REST API wherein we are querying all the clients on that particular networker server. So basically all the client instances that are configured on the networker server. This is a general query because we have not applied any filters here. So if you look at the end, we have just mentioned the endpoint, and what this is going to do is it is going to list out all the client uh, instances that are configured on this machine. The second example here on your screen is the one with the query, and the only difference if you see is that there is a URL parameter here which is q, and the value of the parameter is a key value pair, which is have the key is basically the parameter name and the value is the value of that particular parameter. So here we are using host name and the name of the host name as NSR Linux, and what this is going to do is that this is going to list out all the configuration of all the clients that are configured on the networker server with the host name NSR and hyphen Linux. So the output of the response that comes back from the API server is in a JSON format. So it might look a little cluttered, but is actually very structured. And in the next part of the video that is coming up, hopefully in a week or two, we will be looking at how to use Python to do the or interact with the networker REST API server, and also look at how to get the response back from the API server and how to render it so that we have something that is human readable. Next, let's take a quick look at the HTTP methods that are supported by the Networker API server. So if you are not aware of what exactly HTTP method means, so HTTP method is a call or type of call that is made to a API endpoint depending on what kind of transaction needs to take place. For example, networker API servers support the get method, the put method, the post, and the delete. So if you are familiar with database, it is basically CRUD. So get is usually a read, that is the method get is used in an HTTP call whenever you want to read any information from a particular API. So it is basically a query. Put method is an update method. So this is used whenever you want to update any existing resource that is on your networker server. For example, if you want to change the save set of a particular client, or let's say change the some configuration, maybe assign a different client, change the parallelism, change the target session, or whatever the parameter that is required to be updated, you should always be using the put method. Post is meant for creating a new resource. So if you're creating a new client, a new device, so that kind of requests have to use the method post. And delete, I think It speaks for itself. This is mainly used whenever you want to delete a particular resource. So options is just to list out the allowed headers, a particular endpoint. So this is not usually used unless you are, you are using it for the first time, and you want to see what kind of headers are supported, or what kind of HTTP headers are supported by the respective endpoint. So this was just a quick little query. This was just a quick little information about what and how to use REST API in NetWorker. So let's now go ahead and see, run a few commands and see the output, and how exactly to run them, where to find the important information that you need. So let's get on one of our Linux machines that has access to the NetWorker server. So this is our SNMP trap server, if you remember the notification video. So we had used this there. So first thing first let's go ahead and create the base 64 encoded string for our username and password. So for that, use echo -n. Username is administrator, password is, well, password. So we have to supply single quotes, and then you need to provide what you want to use for encoding. So basically this is the encoded string for this query. Alright, so now that we have the base64 string, let's go ahead and put the URL for testing. So this is the URL that we are going to use. Let's use the IP address, and this should be the same. And there you have it. So here you will see that okay, one more switch here. So what we'll do is we'll use -i as well, so that we get the header information as well. So this is the response from the API server, and this is the header. So you will see that this is a 200 response. So 200 in HTML is a success. So if there are any failures, it would either be a 500 series number or a 400 series number. 400 usually for authentication related issues, or if a particular client or information that was requested was not found. So here you will see the alerts. You will see that it is not able to connect to the data domain and so on. So which means that the authentication is working. The curl is able to reach the NetWorker API server and get information out of it. So let's go ahead and get the clients list. So I'm going to use just the endpoint. So as you saw on the slide earlier, this is going to list out the information for all the clients that are configured in this. Okay. Sometimes you have the certificate error. For that, what you could do is just at the end use the -k switch. So that should fix your issue. And this is all that information. Yeah, as I mentioned, this might look like gibberish, but no, it is well formatted. It's a JSON format, and here it is just spilling it out in this format because of how it is, uh, because it is a simple string here. Okay, so let's look at just one of the client to get more clarity. So to do that, as we saw, we can use a query. So this is going to be a URL parameter q, and it is going to take in a key value pair. So key value pair is basically the parameter and the respective value. So hostname, and I can give NSR Linux, which is the backup server itself. Again, the certificate error, and there we have it, the first information. So you can see here that this is clients, this is the endpoint name, the aliases that it has, the backup application information, backup type, file system. If it is a block-based backup, it's not. Checkpoint enabled, not. client ID, as well as all the other information. So out of this entire stack of information here, there is important information that is hidden, which is basically the resource ID of this particular client. So this is the resource ID. So in order to modify or delete this particular client, we cannot just use a simple query in the URL parameter. We need to point it directly to this particular endpoint via the resource ID. For example, in this case, I could also get the same output using this type of query where I give the endpoint and the resource ID of a particular resource that belongs to that endpoint, and I should be able to get the similar information. So there you have it. So again, this is going to be used whenever you are using the delete method or the put method. So again, the delete method is to delete a resource. The put method is to update a resource. So here, as you have seen, we have used the method get, which is, as you know, is used for querying the resource database or the API. All right, let's look at another example now. Since we have already spoken about the different methods we have, what we could do is, okay, let me show you another endpoint. And I will also be showing you where you will get information related to all this endpoint. Obviously, the one of the best sources of information is the support site. There is a REST API getting started guide which is available. The link to that guide is going to be put up on the description. There is also an resource which is on the NetWorker server itself. It is part of the REST API documentation, and I'm going to show you how to access that as soon as we are done with a couple of these examples. So next, let's check the devices that are configured. So we are going to use the endpoint devices here. So again, certificate error, use K, and there you have it. So again, this is not always important because this information is not required for you to process the output, but this information is here to show you if your query is successful or not, because if you don't have the header added and if there is an error, you will not get any response back sometimes. So that is why we have it there. So as you can see, we have just one device. So we have just one device, and this is the configuration of the device. So you will see all the attributes that you are required. What do you have? Let's see something that we can recognize: max sessions, the max NSR MMD counts, the max consecutive errors. Here is the long volume ID, and let's see what else. What else can you see here? Where do we have the device name? So here is the access information. This is the media type. Here is the name of the device, if it is NDMP or not. Here is the credentials, and here is the path ID. So this is basically all the information that you need. So like what you saw for the client, we needed the resource ID to edit, delete, or you could also query it directly using that particular client ID. Here you need to do it via the device name. So how to find this information? So this is basically held in this parameter or the key value pair, which is href, and this is the resource that is, or this is the parameter that points to this particular resource. So again, if I run this as, let's copy it from here. So just copy this part, and we can repeat the same command again, but this time we'll be placing only this and then enter. Okay, I have an open quote here. So there you go. So similar information, but the way of querying was entirely different. So it's up to you to figure out how you want to use this. Again, this is not directly, you cannot get this directly anywhere. So you need to query that particular instance first to find out what parameter it uses. If it is a resource ID, it is a name or what exactly, and then you can go ahead and use that to make the edit and or updates or deletes or any changes to that particular device or resource setting. So let's now look at where to find this information. So basically it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is go into your NetWorker server or connect your NetWorker server on port 1990. So here you have two options. So we are looking for REST API related information. So we are going to click on REST API. The latest one is version 3, the one which is available on with 19.4 on .3. So it's going to ask you for a username. So this is the same username that you use to log in into your NMC. And here you see you have two options. This is all the endpoints that are available. So here you will see the alerts. So basically it's the list of alerts. Then you have the audit log configuration. You have the list of backups. That is something we can look at. We have the list of clients that we have already taken a look at. Cloud Boost appliance. Let's say data domain system. So basically everything that is listed here can be queried, created, deleted, or edited or updated. Not every resource available on the NetWorker server has an available endpoint right now. So this is work in progress. EMC has always told that they have a lot of plans and they are aggressively working on the API and HTML5 based UI. So the enhancements to HTML5 based UI is directly going to update the API library as well because it is directly associated with that. So this is where you will find the endpoint information. So now let's take a step back and to understand the schema. So you saw all that information, that was spilled over to your screen. So to better understand that, you can look at the JSON schema of each of those resources. So here we have the schema for alerts. So if you see here, you have the entire alert list, category, and all that kind of information that can be used whenever you are trying to use this particular API with any application or any program. For example, Python can be used to automate any operational task or to pull reports or any kind of task that can use the API to interact with the network server and get it done with it. So this is very handy. So these are the two places that you might want to know and also document and keep it somewhere that so that your teammates know it whenever you are going to work with the network REST API. So let's switch back to our server. So let's take a look at the backups now. So we can go back here and say backups, and there we have it, all the backups that belong to this particular network server. Let me use this to query for a particular client. So let's see, let's go for q equal to, and let's say client host name, which is the parameter key here, and we can use the value of the network server just for this example. Okay, and don't forget the -k because of the certificate. So again, see, you will see all the backups related to the network server itself. So next, I wanted you to show one example each for each of the methods that we have. So we have already gone through get. So let's take a look at post, which is basically the creation of a client. So first, let me just explain the structure. So here you will see that the first part is almost the same. We just have an additional switch called data. So data is basically the body of your message that you are sending across. So since this is a post, so post usually has a body associated with it, because post is meant for creating something, and for creating something some information has to be sent over. And here we are sending again a JSON object or a string of JSON format with the relevant information. So here the endpoint is going to be client, so we have to give it relevant information related to that particular client. If you want to create a generic uh, client instance, like with general settings or the default settings, you can just give the host name of that particular client and leave everything empty, and that is going to create a client instance of that particular client with all the default settings. So let's go ahead and let me first bring up the NMC here. So as you can see, I do not have any clients with the name SQL1. I've deleted them. And now we are going to create a SQL client with the save set definition of backing up the C drive and belonging to the protection group demo DC. Let's go ahead and hit enter. So I missed the -I. So basically it is successful. So again, if I just give a -I and try to create it again, you will see the return code is 400, which is actually an error, which means that this command did not complete successfully. And the output that I have is that this particular client is already existing. So C drive would be specified by two clients with the same name in the group. So this is the error that we have, which is the correct error considering the issue. And then you will see that we have the C drive created here. So this is how the post works. Now let's go ahead and see how the put method works. But for that, we will need to get the resource ID of this particular client. SQL1.com, and then the endpoint is clients, and we need the -k. 400 error. So let's see what the issue is. Our client host name. So the parameter is different. It's not client host name. It is just host name. And there we have it. So this is the resource ID for this particular client. We can quickly confirm this by using it again as a direct endpoint. And there we have it. This is the same client. This it has C drive as the parameter. So let me clear this now. Let's go back to the push format because I need that format to be the same. And what we'll be doing here is we will be updating the URL with the resource ID as one of the endpoint parameters. And what we'll do now is we can change. Let's change the save set. Let's make it all. And then we have to change the method to put. So now we cannot use the post again because post is to create, and it will not try to create it because create all because C drive is already there. So let's go ahead and update, and it's a 204. Yeah, 204 is the return code whenever you use the put method for NetWorker. So this means that it has completed successfully. So let's go ahead and refresh, and you will see that this particular parameter or save set has been updated. Delete is very simple. So we can use this here and just change this to delete. Now, if you do this and you have multiple clan instances, then all the clan instances are going to be deleted. So make sure that if you have multiple instances, you add a query to the end of the uh, endpoint URL. And if I now use this is again 204, which is success. And if we go and refresh it now, it is all gone. So this was a quick demo of how to use the REST API. So there were a lot of requests around this, and I hope this information is enough to enable you to start working on exploring the REST API for NetWorker. As mentioned earlier, I'm also working on creating another video which would be dedicated to using Python along with the NetWorker REST API, so that you can create a small program maybe to read a particular client and get a nice formatted output from out of that query. So stay tuned for that.